The wait is finally over, and honestly, what just got revealed about Yellowstone 6666 is so big that even the most diehard Yellowstone fans are completely losing their minds right now. This isn't just a trailer drop. This isn't just a first look. What we just got from the 6666 Ranch is something that is going to completely change the way you think about the entire Yellowstone universe, and I promise you, by the end of this video, you are going to see why everyone is saying that 6666 might not just be a spin-off, it might actually be bigger than Yellowstone itself. So let's start from the very beginning, because to truly understand why this first look is so shocking, you need to understand just how long we have been waiting for this moment and what exactly makes 6666 so different from every other spin-off that Taylor Sheridan has ever put together. Because here's the thing, when Taylor Sheridan first introduced the 6666 Ranch inside Yellowstone, it wasn't just a background detail thrown in to make the world feel bigger. It was deliberate. It was calculated. Every single time the 6666 Ranch was mentioned in Yellowstone, it was treated with this kind of deep respect and almost mythical reputation that made you feel like this place was something on a completely different level from everything else. And now, seeing it come to life in full detail through this first look, it is clear that Taylor Sheridan has been planning this for a very long time. Now, the first thing that hits you immediately when you watch this first look is just how different the visual tone of 6666 feels compared to Yellowstone. And I mean that in the best possible way. Yellowstone always had this dark, heavy, dramatic atmosphere where every scene felt like something terrible was about to happen at any moment. There was always that tension sitting right underneath the surface of everything. But 6666 feels different. It feels bigger, more open, more raw. The landscapes alone tell you that this is a world where nature is not just a backdrop, it is a character in itself. The Texas plains, the endless sky, the sheer scale of the ranch. Everything you see in this first look tells you that 6666 is operating on a completely different level of ambition compared to what we have seen before in this universe. And when you think about what Taylor Sheridan has actually built with this show, it becomes even more impressive. Because Yellowstone was already one of the most successful shows in the history of American television. It broke records that nobody expected a Western drama to break in this era of television. And yet, looking at what 6666 is shaping up to be, it genuinely feels like Taylor Sheridan looked at everything he built with Yellowstone and decided he wanted to go even further. He wanted to tell a story that was not just about power and family and land, but about something deeper, about what it actually means to dedicate your entire life to a place, to a craft, to a way of living that most of the modern world has completely forgotten about. And that brings us to something really important that this first look revealed, which is the overall tone and direction of the story. Because for a long time, people were wondering whether 6666 was going to follow the same formula as Yellowstone, meaning big dramatic family conflicts, power struggles, political battles, and all of that intense Dutton family energy. But what this first look makes very clear is that 6666 is going in a somewhat different direction. Yes, there will absolutely be conflict. Yes, there will be rivalries and drama and moments that will have you sitting on the edge of your seat. But the heart of this show, the real emotional core of it, is going to be built around the ranch itself and the people who give their lives to it. This is a show about what it means to truly belong somewhere. And that is a much more personal and emotionally complex story than anything we have seen in the Yellowstone universe so far. Now let's talk about something that this first look made very clear, and that is the production quality of this show. Because honestly, it deserves its own conversation. Everything about 6666 from what we have seen so far looks absolutely cinematic. And I don't mean that in the casual way people throw that word around. I mean, this show looks like it was made to be watched on the biggest screen possible. So the cinematography, the way the camera moves across the land, the way light hits the dust in the air during the ranch scenes, all of it feels intentional and incredibly detailed. Taylor Sheridan has always been serious about authenticity, and you can see that in every single frame of what has been revealed so far. This is not a show that is trying to fake what ranch life looks like. This is a show that is going out of its way to make you feel like you are actually there, standing in the middle of the 6666 ranch, breathing in the same air as the characters. And speaking of let's pick up right where we left off, because that detail hiding in the background is only the beginning of what this first look is really telling us, and the deeper you dig into everything that was revealed, the more you realize that Taylor Sheridan has been planting seeds for 666 that go all the way back to the very first season of Yellowstone. And that is not an accident. That is a storyteller who knew exactly where he was going from the very start, and now that we are finally here, now that 6666 is actually becoming a reality in front of our eyes, everything is starting to connect in ways that are genuinely breathtaking when you sit down and think about it carefully. So let's talk about the ranch itself in a way that goes beyond just the visuals, because the 6666 ranch is not just a setting for this story, it is practically a character on its own. And the first look made that abundantly clear. The real 46's ranch in Texas is one of the oldest and most legendary ranches in American history. And Taylor Sheridan, who actually owns a part of it in real life, understands that history in a way that most writers simply would not. He is not approaching this story from the outside looking in. He is approaching it as someone who has lived and breathed this world, and that insider perspective gives 6666 an authenticity that is almost impossible to fake. When you watch the ranch hands move through their daily routines in this first look, when you see the way they handle the horses and interact with the land, you are not watching actors playing cowboys. You are watching something that feels genuinely lived in, genuinely real, and that realness is going to be the foundation that everything else in the story is built on. Now, the horse breeding aspect of 6666 is something that deserves a much deeper conversation than most people have been having about the show, because it is actually central to understanding what kind of dramatic tension this series is going to generate. Horse breeding at this level, at the level of a legendary operation like the 6666 Ranch, is an incredibly high-stakes world. We are talking about animals that are worth hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars. We are talking about bloodlines that have been carefully cultivated over generations. We are talking about a business where one bad decision, one injury, one stolen horse, one betrayed trust can have consequences that ripple through the entire operation for years. And when you frame it that way, when you understand the financial and emotional weight that these animals carry in this world, suddenly the drama that is built around horse breeding stops feeling like a niche interest and starts feeling like exactly the kind of life and death storytelling that Taylor Sheridan does better than anyone. And this first look gave us some very clear hints that the horse breeding storyline in 6666 is going to be far more intense and far more emotionally complex than anyone was expecting, because it is not just going to be about the business side of things, about who is winning and who is losing in the breeding world. It is going to be about the relationships between the people and the animals themselves, about what it means to dedicate your life to something that cannot speak for itself but can still break your heart completely. Jimmy's connection to horses was always one of the most quietly beautiful threads running through his story in Yellowstone. And in 6666, that connection is clearly going to be pushed to a whole new level of depth and emotional complexity that is going to make those earlier scenes look like just the opening chapter of something much bigger. But let's shift focus for a moment and talk about something that the first look revealed about the rival ranch dynamic, because this is where things start getting really interesting and really dangerous in the best possible way. Because 6666 is not operating in a vacuum. It exists in a world where other ranches, other powerful families, other ambitious and ruthless people are all competing for the same resources, the same land, the same reputation. And from what this first look showed us, there is at least one rival operation that is going to make life extremely difficult for everyone at 6666. And the person running that rival operation is clearly someone who does not play by the same rules as the people we are rooting for. This is not going to be a clean, honorable competition between two ranches that respect each other. Like, this is going to be dirty, this is going to be personal, and this is going to get very, very ugly before it gets better. And this is where the casting of this show becomes so incredibly important, because the kind of antagonist that 6666 needs to make this rivalry feel truly threatening has to be someone with real screen presence, real charisma, real ability to make you feel the danger every time they walk into a scene. And from what has been circulating about, and that question is exactly what keeps you up at night when you really start pulling apart everything that Taylor Sheridan has been quietly building toward with 6666, because the more you look at the bigger picture, the more you realize that this show is not just continuing the Yellowstone universe, it is fundamentally redefining what that universe is capable of being. And the evidence for that is not hidden in some obscure interview or buried in a behind-the-scenes detail that only the most obsessive fans would ever find. It is sitting right there in plain sight for anyone who is paying close enough attention, and once you see it, once you truly understand what Taylor Sheridan is actually doing with this story, you will never be able to look at 6666 the same way again. Let's start with something that has been completely overlooked in almost every conversation about this show, and that is the timeline. Because the question of exactly when 6666 is set relative to the events of Yellowstone is something that has enormous implications for the kind of story this show is going to tell and the kind of connections it is going to make to the wider universe. And from the details that this first look revealed, both directly and indirectly, it is becoming increasingly clear that 6666 is not simply picking up right where Yellowstone left off. There are signs, subtle but unmistakable if you know what to look for, that suggest the timeline of 6666 is going to do something genuinely unexpected, something that is going to force you to recontextualize events from Yellowstone in ways that will completely change how you feel about certain storylines and certain character decisions that you thought you already fully understood. Think about what that actually means for a moment, because Yellowstone ended with so many threads left deliberately unresolved, so many questions about what happened to certain characters and certain situations that fans have been desperately trying to piece together ever since. And if 6666 is operating on a timeline that overlaps with or even predates some of those unresolved moments, then this show has the potential to answer questions that Yellowstone never answered directly. Not through flashbacks or exposition dumps, but through the natural unfolding of its own story, through the way its characters talk about things that happened, through the way certain events cast shadows over the present day of the 6666 ranch. And that is an incredibly sophisticated and exciting way to expand a universe without simply retreading the same ground that the original show already covered. Now let's talk about something that the first look hinted at very strongly but never stated outright, and that is the question of outside threats. Because the rival ranch dynamic that we touched on earlier is really only one layer of the conflict that 6666 is going to be dealing with, and from what this first look revealed, there is a much larger, much more systemic threat looming over the 6666 ranch that goes beyond any single rival or any personal grudge. We are talking about the kind of threat that comes from the changing nature of the world itself, the encroachment of modern interests, corporate money, land developers, and outside forces that see a legendary ranch like 6666 not as a living piece of American history, but simply as an asset to be acquired, broken up, and monetized. And that kind of threat is terrifying in a completely different way than anything Yellowstone ever threw at the Duttons, because you cannot fight it with fists or loyalty or even guns. You have to be smarter than it, you have to be more patient than it, and you have to be willing to sacrifice things you love to protect the things you love even more. Taylor Sheridan has always been deeply passionate about this particular theme, about the death of the American frontier and the relentless pressure that modern capitalism puts on the people who are still trying to live by older, harder, more honest values. You can feel it in every project he has ever made, but in 6666, it feels like he finally has the perfect canvas to explore that theme at its fullest depth. because the 6666 Ranch is not just a fictional location in a television show. It is based on a real place with a real history that goes back over 150 years. And the idea of that kind of legacy being threatened by the cold, indifferent machinery of modern money and modern greed is something that is going to hit audiences in a way that feels deeply personal and deeply urgent. This is not just drama for the sake of drama. This is Taylor Sheridan using the language of television to talk about something that genuinely matters to him, and that passion always makes for unforgettable storytelling. And speaking of unforgettable storytelling, let's get into something that the first look revealed about the romantic story, because that connection is not just a fun Easter egg for the most obsessive fans to discover and celebrate. It is the backbone of something much larger, much more deliberately constructed, and much more emotionally significant than anything the Yellowstone universe has ever attempted to pull off before. And understanding that connection, truly understanding what it means for the story of 6666 and for the wider universe that Taylor Sheridan has been building across multiple shows and multiple years, requires you to look at this entire project from a completely different angle than most people have been looking at it. Because most people have been watching 6666 develop and thinking about it as an addition to the Yellowstone universe. But what if it is actually the foundation of it? What if everything that happened in Yellowstone, all the drama and the bloodshed and the heartbreak and the triumph, was actually always pointing back toward this place, this ranch, this land, and the story that 6666 is finally going to tell in full? Let's talk about something that becomes very clear when you look at the first look footage with this perspective in mind, and that is the way 6666 handles the mythology of ranching literature in a way that goes so much deeper than anything Yellowstone ever really had the space to explore. Because Yellowstone was always primarily